Hey everybody, it's Alex from Engineering Applied. We're going to be accelerating your career, hobby, or business with this overview of the available Emboss function found in Autodesk Inventor. If you want more easy to understand and practical content made by an experienced engineer like myself, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any helpful content like this in the future. If you're looking for a specific function, make sure you check the description for timestamps. And if you don't find what you're looking for in this video, make sure you check out the rest of my Autodesk Inventor series playlist because I'm confident you'll find exactly what you're looking for. Let's get started. Okay, so we are in our part file now, and you'll notice I went ahead and modeled up a wrench of size 5/16. And our objective here is to use the emboss function to create some raised features, or an emboss from face feature, to signify the size of the wrench and whether this is a standard set or a part of our metric set. And then on the other side of the wrench, we're going to do the opposite and create some engraved features that recess down into the solid body itself. So let's start with the raised surfaces. And what we're going to do is we're going to start a 2D sketch on this plane. And let me just rotate this around so it's easier to see. And I'm going to use the text tool to create these closed profiles. You can actually use any other sketch tool that you want. Just as long as your profiles are closed, you'll be able to use the emboss features to create some raised surfaces or to engrave those shapes. So we'll click text in this case, and I'll just drop some text here. I want it to say standard, and then I'll put a hyphen and then 5/16. We'll just click OK. Click OK once more. I'll just sort of click and drag this and center it. You know, obviously if you're designing a product or whatever, you want to make sure this is fully dimensioned and defined, but for the cases of this tutorial, that's unnecessary. We'll finish 2D sketch there. Let's rotate this just a little bit more. Okay, we go up to Emboss. Now, in our Emboss dialog box, or in this little window that pops up, the first option that we want to look at is the profile selection option. So you'll notice it has like a little dashed line going around the periphery of the box. So that's designating that profile tool active. And then we just hover over our text, which is our closed profile. This could be also other shapes, like I said previously, that you draw up manually. But again, we're putting text. This is the most efficient way to do it. Now we come over here to the right, and we want to make sure that emboss from face is selected. This creates a raised surface off of our face of interest. This option here is engraved from face, so this would actually cut down into the part. And then this last option is emboss engraved from plane, which basically creates a raised or engraved surface based off of a reference plane in your 3D space. But we'll leave it on the first option because we want to create some raised text. We have our profile selected, and you'll notice we have a little green arrow. The green arrow signifies that we are going to add material in this case. And then underneath you have your emboss direction selector. So currently it's defaulting to the upward direction. Now, since we created this feature on this face, it doesn't really matter which one of these we select in this case, but I'll give you an example right after we complete this to where it actually does matter which one of these you have toggled. So we'll leave it on the default, and we want to set our depth. So I want it to be, let's say about 0.010 of an inch above the surface. So we have a little bit of a tactile feel to the wrench handle, and it gives us a little bit of extra grip as well as we're, torquing whatever it is that we're working on down. So we have that set to where we want it. You also notice there's a little arrow here. This will allow us to select some different measurement options. So we can create our depth based off of a measurement or a feature dimension. So that's pretty handy if you're driving this depth off of another design element in your model. But we want it to be just a blind depth here. And then you'll notice there's this little gray box here. What this box allows us to do is it allows us to access our appearance menu for the top finished face. So you'll notice that it's set to semi-polished by default in this particular example. But let's make it a little bit more of an obvious color so that we can pick up on that feature easily in our model. So we'll just change it to smooth red. Make sure we click OK there. And we'll just press OK here. And you'll notice we get our raised surface with a red finish on the top. Now, you don't necessarily have to do a custom finish within the emboss function, you could technically leave it as the polished look or whatever it defaults to for you. And then you can click on these surfaces independently and then set your color or your finish up here separately. But this way is much faster if you do it this way. So that's the first option. I'm going to cut to an example where we can play around with our emboss direction, whether it's down or up, so you could see the difference in how that interacts with the part. Okay, so I'm back in the Emboss tool, and you'll notice that I created a work plane or a reference plane that's mid-plane to either side of the wrench handle. And what I'm doing here is I put the text on the reference plane instead because I want to illustrate what happens when you actually select one direction or the other in this case. So I've selected the profile, it's on that mid plane, and we have our green arrow facing up, and we'll just set a blind depth of like 0.250. This will protrude very much so through the part one way or another, but this will get all the way through the thickness here. And we'll leave it on the default. So it's going to go upwards in this case. So we'll just let it do that. And you'll notice we get our text raised in that upwards direction. Now, if we go back into the emboss function, select that profile again, and then flip this direction, you'll notice that it actually goes through the bottom of the wrench rather than the top. And you'll also notice that the text is backwards here. Well, that's because from this original point of view and going down, this is sort of the projection that you get in this case. So this is a similar behavior as if you were to use the engrave function instead of the emboss from face. So this applies to the engrave as well as the original emboss from face. We're now back to our original emboss from face that we did with the red appearance on the top of the embossed face. And again, this is a recessed surface with raised lettering. Now, let's do the exact opposite and create an engrave feature on the other side of the wrench. So we'll flip it over. Here's our raised surface that we're going to engrave down into. So we'll create our 2D sketch here. We'll drop our text. I want it to be the same. I want it to read the same information on both sides. Sometimes it'll say different information on either side if the tool is patented or whatever else the company wants to put on the tool itself. So we'll just have it the same as the other side. So we'll leave it as standard 5/16. Click OK. We'll just drop it somewhere on the surface. It really doesn't matter in this case. Finish 2D sketch. Okay. Now we go back to emboss. All right, so now we want to select our profile. Go over to the second option and click engrave from face. Again, it doesn't matter in this scenario which direction we engrave because we're not using a neutral mid-plane like I showed you in that other example. Now, if we had this text on a mid-plane, we could actually select which direction we want to engrave through. So whether through the top of the wrench or through the bottom. But in this case, we'll leave it to the default and we'll set our depth to, we'll leave it on 15 thousandths of an inch. And let's see, let's change our appearance. Actually, we'll leave it on semi-polished this time. So we won't have a red appearance. It'll just be that normal polished steel look. So we'll click OK. And now we have our engraved feature. And again, you'll see this a lot in a lot of tools that are out on the market. And if you're trying to go for the same effect in your models, this is a great way to do it. Okay, let's talk about the wrap to face feature within the emboss function. And in this particular scenario, I have a 7/16 socket for a socket wrench. And I went ahead and typed out my text on a reference plane that is tangent to the cylindrical face of the socket itself. And I went ahead and put the country of origin, the size of the socket, and then the material. This is what I want to have engraved in the actual part. Now, once we have our sketch on our sketch plane, we exit that sketch and we go up to create and emboss. We'll go over to the engrave from face because we want to actually engrave this into the part itself. We'll select the profile and I want to check this little box that says wrap to face. Once I do that, it'll bring up this little selection tool for face. We just hover over the face that we want to wrap the text to and just left click there. And now we just hit OK. And you'll notice we have our text engraved all the way around the barrel of this socket. And you could use this for all sorts of things. So maybe you're creating a reusable stainless steel cup. I know you've all seen them. They're out there everywhere on the market, but oftentimes they have their brand sort of wrapped around the bottom. You can signify this with the emboss function if that is what you're looking to do. Of course, there's other ways of doing this manually, but this just sort of automates that process for you and it makes it as simple as possible. The last thing I want to talk about is the Emboss Engrave from Plane option found within the Emboss function. So as far as setup goes, I went ahead and extruded a square profile and I created a work plane that's on an angle and it intersects the part. So it cuts through the solid body. Then I created a sketch on the angled plane itself and just typed the word example. But you'll notice I sort of cut this word in half along that seam line at the surface where that plane cuts through the part. And this is really important for this tool. So if we go to Emboss after we finish our sketch on that plane, we'll go over to the Emboss Engrave from Plane option. We'll select our profile. And you'll notice now we have a couple different options found within the dialog box. First, we have a symmetric command, and we'll get to that in just a moment. The first command is our first direction, and so you see the arrow pointing up. So let's just go ahead and click OK and see what happens. So you'll notice what happened was the text that resides on the plane below the surface going upwards towards the top surface of the solid body, it created an engrave on an angle there. So if we look a little bit closer, you'll see there's an actual angle to each one of these letters. Now, we'll just go back to the emboss function itself. Let's flip this direction. We'll click this middle button first. We'll click OK. And the arrow was pointing down, and you'll notice it does the exact opposite. It goes from the plane down into the body, and it creates 3D geometry in this space. So we have these raised lettering on angle here. So let's go back into Emboss, and let's do this double arrow version or the symmetric version of it and click OK. Now it incorporates both of those in one command. So it's almost as if you cut around each one of the letters and then slit it on an angle. And this is a really powerful function because you're combining a lot of complex commands in one shot. So if you want to create a shape or whatever based on a plane into another part, this is a great way to do it. Let's talk about the taper setting here found within the Emboss Engrave from Plane option in the Emboss menu. So you'll notice here I have a plane, an offset plane that's parallel to this top face of the solid body. And what I want to do is I want to sort of flare this base of the emboss feature or the base of the square outwards to create sort of like a pyramid shape, if you will. So I'll change this to about 50 degrees, click OK. And notice how it sort of flares out. It increases the size of the square and it gives us a taper there. So if you're trying to create a taper from the emboss menu, this is how you would do it. That concludes this segment of the Autodesk Inventor part creation module, where we took a look at the available emboss function. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on notifications to stay up to date on future content that will help you reach your goals along your journey. And of course, don't hesitate to leave a comment or reach out via my website contact page and let me know if there's anything else you'd like to learn about or see on this channel. I genuinely love sharing my knowledge and experience with all of you in the community, and I cannot wait to see all of the positive impact you'll be creating out in the world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.